Good morning again. Thank you so much for joining us for another segment of Java Chat with Film Incentive States. I'm your host, Marco Cordova, and I have a great panel of experts talking about film incentives and everything film industry-wise. We have here Marge Gallus, Nicole Amlin, Ryan Broussard, Deidre Owens, and David Brower. This segment will talk about Western states. Probably the most important state to discuss here is California. David, since you're one of the few CPA firms that work on CPA projects in California, can you give us some insight on the new legislation that passed?
Sure. So thanks for having me. California is currently in their iteration 3.0 of the tax credit program, and which runs from their fiscal year from July 1st through June 30th. This fiscal year, starting in 2022, there is a new bill, Senate Bill 144, which maintains the current tax credit program, which allocates $330 million to different productions, and it's based on whether or not they have it broken down. And their website, I will say, is probably one of the best websites you can go and get information on. But they allocate the $330 million depending on what kind of production it is. If it's a feature film, if it's an independent, if it's a micro independent under 10 million, if it's a television show, a relocating television show. So they have different buckets that they allocate the funds to, and they allocate the funds throughout the year. You do have to apply. It's based on a jobs ratio, which is a jobs creation, which takes how many qualified wages plus some of your qualified expenses to the potential tax credit you're going to get. That's the ratio. That's the simplified version of the ratio. It's more in depth on their website, and it ranks you among your fellow applicants. And then they allocate a maximum amount of tax credit that you can receive from the state. If you are an independent, these tax credits are transferable. And as other panel members here will tell you, they are highly coveted because there's not too many of them. So if you're not financing them, they go for quite a bit over normal tax credits that are transferred, I will say. But other panelists can speak to that. What's new now in this new iteration of the Senate Bill 44 is they are looking to create more infrastructure with studio projects of renovations and creation of construction in sound stages. And that's going to be a separate allocation of what they look at, with a separate CPA firms doing audits of that to make sure that they are verified and what they're I would say revitalizing sound stages or creating new ones. You have to spend at least 25 million in construction, and I think it's a 5-year continuous period that you need to do that for. The applicants, must also provide a diversity work plan. So they're trying to get more diversity into the film industry as well as what's going on, and that diversity plan will be approved by the California Film Commission and reviewed at a later date to make sure that everyone kind of checked the boxes of what they wanted to do and where they ended up at the end of it. So it's a lot of good changes. They're still maintaining itself, at the 330 million. Another benefit for these studio projects, my understanding is that projects then that shoot on these new sound stages also, if it's a TV show, will get allocated, to the next round of financing. They are capping the amount now that certain projects can get. So if a project that is from a certified studio construction project, if it's a recurring TV show, you're going to get a cap of $12 million per season. And if you're a feature film, you're going to get a 12 million cap as well. Still quite a bit of money, but some of them may run over, but right now they're capping it to make sure that they get spread around the allocations to everyone.
Yeah, and these credits, I think, and you could correct me if I'm wrong, but they seem to be geared more towards the larger major studios because they're the ones who could afford, building a soundstage or lease a soundstage for 10 years. So it
Correct.
seems like, it's really for the larger studios, the $150 million allocation under the $330 million per year for the next 2 years. But as far as other rules, you mentioned projects that are recurring and also relocating, that's also getting some additional funds, correct?
Correct. Yeah. So to your point, yes, this is really geared towards the studios to help again revitalize their infrastructure if it's deteriorated, and also to create new opportunities outside the Los Angeles zone where they can also build sound stages and help you know get some of the costs down, if you will, from the state. But the it's interesting is, and I think there's an allocation about the period about to finish right now as we're recording this for feature films. What they did try to do was to kind of, like I said before, spread the wealth around, right? So they're taking a percentage of this huge pot that they have and are saying, all right, we want to make sure that if you're an independent film and you're coming in California, and this, a lot of the times, this independent film, if they don't get this tax credit, the film doesn't go. So it's really important for them. So they're trying to say, we want more of these independents here as well. We know we're going to get the tentpole huge studio films in California as well, but we want to make sure that not only are we giving money to the big guys, but kind of the smaller production companies get it as well. And also now in California, part of what they're doing is they're trying, if you do get accepted in the program, you pay a fee upfront based on your potential tax credit. And that's to create more job diversity, as I mentioned before, but also job training, where they're trying to get more people in the industry trained and up to speed. In our previous session, we talked about production accountants. That's going to be something else as well, that they're going to start training more people to make sure that this industry can thrive for future generations.
That's great. Yeah, that's something from our side, at Media Services, we're dealing a lot with independents all day, every day. And I used to never have clients that were accepted into the California program in the past. Even when California had an independent section, it was a very broad section, right, David? It was very open of how big the independent could be. But recently, I believe with the 3.0, when they released the 3.0, they have an allocated amount for independents that are 10 million and below. So to David's point, to try to be more inclusive and have more independents, even ones that are 10 million and below, so they're not competing for the same money as a $30 million independent. They've opened the doors up for independents that are 10 million below. So now, as David mentioned, their phase as of now, I think phase 2 ended yesterday. When was that? A few days ago. So they're about to enter the next round, the next phase. I've got a few people in it, and that's great to see from the smaller independent standpoint that they're able to go for it. So that's a program that's ever changing, and really for the best, to David's point.
Nicole, have you worked on any applications? I know California is probably the hardest, if not one of the hardest, to get credits.
Yeah, I mean, as we've been discussing, the program is really for the larger studios, considering that if you don't transfer it, you have to have enough credit and tax liability to use the credits against, which is enormous. And so my business is really just in that bucket that we were talking about for the independents. That's who typically my clients are, not the studios. And when it comes to California, it's typically the independents that are coming to me, and they're usually in a panic, and a complete panic over the jobs ratio.
The jobs ratio, that's what you keep
Yes, yes, they are.
The producers cannot sleep at night. They can't handle it. I think I would like to see California actually put more money in the pot for independents and start lightening up on that jobs ratio for those independents.
So to your point, Nicole, the jobs ratio actually, they gave you kind of a little bit of leeway, especially in independents under 2.0, where if your jobs ratio went over 20%, you start losing your tax credit between 20 and 30% differential of a reduction in jobs ratio. They actually made everyone even now in 3.0. So as you go from 10% to 20%, you start losing your jobs ratio.
Yeah.
And to your point, those on the California projects we work on, those are the panic calls we get. Usually from beginning to the end, because they'll get into the program and then something will change and they may not film as many days in California, or something gets pushed out with somebody working remotely, as we discussed previously. And it's the first call I get is,
Yeah.
how do I figure out my jobs ratio?
It's sad, really, because, there's not, they're just trying to make probably a passion project or something that's meaningful for them, and they can't seem to get it done. So to me, I feel for these independents trying to film in California, on top of just making sure that you get into the program at all in the first place. And so it's a rough jurisdiction. I do get quite a bit of clients, but again, in that bucket of independents typically, and it's really almost nightmarish for me to work on them.
Yeah, and we talked earlier, David mentioned these are credits that you have to sell. So I've actually, I think I worked with you, Deidre, recently on a California deal where they are netting, in the low to mid 90-cent range. So it is one of the credits that producers can definitely get, pretty good money for their credits.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Real quick, since we talked mostly about California, I wanted to bring up another popular state in the West Coast, New Mexico. So New Mexico has been around for a while. I actually worked on some of the first big projects there, like Breaking Bad. And so just wanted to see your thoughts on New Mexico, and if you think there's anything that is going to come up in the near future, or if you have any trends or seeing anything about New Mexico.
I can speak to New Mexico and some of the clients that I've had for New Mexico. One of the things that I've seen is New Mexico's, I think, also ever changing. And so every once in a while, you really need to pull what they have as their guidelines is FYI 370, because that date on that keeps changing during your production. Every 6 months, you don't know you're working with the same rules. So I do find that their website changes a lot, their guidelines change a lot, and in one production that can go on for, let's say, a year or so that you're working on it, you need to check that website and make sure that you're following those instructions. The other thing that I see in New Mexico is, as your accountants take a meeting with the film office as required in the beginning of the show or prior to principal photography, all this information is getting fed to the production accountant. So, but by the time the post accountant comes on, none of that information was shared to the end of it. And I've had to go back and redo shows accounting systems, essentially, and how they've accounted for everything, because either the information didn't get passed down, the accountants didn't hear the information correctly, and then they had to do it at the end. So I personally find New Mexico to be a little bit more work than any other jurisdictions. But once you do it, it's not too bad. And then it's really just how the production's handling the show itself with their accountants. One of the benefits of having me on a project is that I can go from your production accountants to your post accountants. Post accountants can leave, and then I'm working with your tax preparers doing the tax return. So I'm sure you're one constant throughout. I think that's the biggest recommendation I would say for New Mexico, is just make sure that when you start the show, you're doing it right and it's following throughout the show, because there's different requirements throughout. And they're not as clear with the information, in my opinion, about whether pension, health, and welfare qualifies and for who. And there's some details in how the per diems and some of those details in New Mexico that in your accounting system, if you're not recording it properly, I think can be challenging if it's not prepared properly in your GL.
Yeah, and also,
sorry. I was just going to say, to further to what Nicole's saying, as the auditors there, which is a requirement if your credit's over 5 million, you get pretty much one shot to submit your ledger. Because once you submit your ledger to TRD, which is the entity that will make the selections for the CPAs to audit, they run it through statistical sampling, and if you have errors, they're going to just start, they chip away quite aggressively at the amount of tax credit you can earn. So it's extremely important to make sure whatever ledger you're going to submit is definitely cleaned up and tagged appropriately.
And the super loan out too. I'm sorry, you guys, you won't believe it. My power went out from a storm the second we started talking about the jobs ratio. The second we talked about the jobs
I'm
ratio,
sorry, Ryan.
it was like it was like somebody knew
Thunderstorm.
you were bad mouthing the jobs ratio, and it came to
Don't mess with California.
yeah, don't. I mean, seriously. I mean, they came and got me. But the super loan out in New Mexico, that is something that's very interesting. If you guys haven't talked about that, I mean, that's from a payroll perspective, we see that, all the time. People not even being aware that in order for your actors to qualify, they have to pay gross receipts tax, and they have to go through something called the super loan out. And it's not like an Avenger or anything. It's like a real thing that you have to set up in order to remit gross receipts tax and verify withholding for the actor. So that's something that when I get budgets and when Deidre gets budget as well, and everybody, sometimes we don't see it. If they're going to New Mexico and they're saying, oh, I'm comparing like, Nevada to New Mexico or even California, they don't have that cost in there. And it can, especially now with these fluid rules constantly changing, it can be a pretty penny now for the gross receipts tax. It's gone up recently. So definitely something to budget for and be aware of.
You don't see those actors paying them willingly, or is it more the studio covering the costs?
Well, the gross receipts tax is usually paid by the studio or the production company. The withholding comes from the actors themselves on the loan out. And it's only for loan outs with the actor. But the production company or studio pays the gross receipts tax. So that needs to be in the budget along with the super loan out fee.
And you guys are set up for the super loan out, of course. So it's great to learn. If you
Through
guys
our
need-
parent company with Cast and Crew. Yeah,
Yeah.
they've got it completely set up correctly. They've been doing it for years. And so, yeah, they pass through that in order to qualify.
Great. Okay, so I think on the other Western states, real quick, has anyone done any projects in Montana? I know it's a small program, 10 million per year. Have you guys heard anything from Montana? Because it's also a state where you're forced to sell the credit. So I do get little pockets of interest from Montana.
If I'm not mistaken though, Marco, I believe Yellowstone took a lot of those over these past few years. So I haven't had any Montana shows recently, I think because of Yellowstone.
Okay.
I have two, and Marco, they're smaller. Marco, I'll be calling you about them very soon. The rules there are pretty new, and they have some interesting bonuses there. But the people that filmed there said, it was relatively easy to film there, but there's still in terms of crew base and stuff, they still had to bring a good amount of people there because, as Nicole mentioned, Yellowstone's there and eating up everybody. So that's something to just be aware of and budget appropriately for. But that crew base will grow as the incentive gets better, and so does the industry and infrastructure there.
And this is just something I wanted to mention, especially for smaller independents, to make sure, if you're going to a small state, to know how much money's left, because obviously Montana, unfortunately, they don't cap the amount that any project can take. So theoretically, one project can take the entire $10 million cap.
And
so
and
that's
also,
something to-
if it's a state that could start allocating future periods, certain states will just allocate future periods. So you would think the money's coming in a certain time frame, but it comes in a lot later.
Yeah. And
I want to throw in too, just that anyone that's interested, regardless of the incentives, should reach out to the film commissioners. I know Montana has a very able-bodied commissioner, and they'd be happy to try to help you out however they can to help you bring your project to life.
Great. And I think that's it for the Western states. So thank you again for joining us. Stay tuned. We have a couple more jurisdictions for the central states coming up.
Thanks, Marco.